Hey, everybody. Welcome to Penny's Monfiles Method, the podcast showing you where the off ramp to the healing highway is when you're stuck on the life sucks road to nowhere. In this episode, we're going to dissect fault. Whose fault is what? And what are some of the mind files associated with determining fault, which is really the same as assigning blame? Now, I have to warn you that this discussion is going to hit that proverbial nerve in some people, but it's an important conversation to have if you are on the healing journey. So, not too long ago, I was talking with somebody about how choosing to relax your boundaries for whatever your reasons are, most often it's guilt based, pity based, whatever. You feel sorry for somebody. And then when that person you relax the boundaries for seizes the opportunity not only to walk through them, but literally trample whatever remnants there were left of your personal boundaries to the ground, well, eventually, and who knows how long that's going to take, you're going to get to the point where you're like, okay, I'm done. I've had enough. And then the boundaries are going to go back up, likely higher and considerably stronger than they were way back when you relaxed them. Because now you've learned the importance of maintaining those boundaries. But the person that you relax them for, when those boundaries go back, they're going to get offended. And likely they're going to be self righteous. And that's going to trigger you again. Now, all the consequences of all of those things is twofold. One, the relationship's going to be strained, probably will eventually break down. And the second thing is now you have choices to make. You can either A, figure out why you relaxed those boundaries in the first place, or you can choose to ignore it all, pretend nothing happened, and relive the whole experience again when you meet somebody else and you relax your boundaries because of the same reasons. So during this conversation with this person, I shared a personal example. And as soon as I got to the part of my story where I said, it was absolutely my fault, right away, her body language started screaming, no, it isn't, which told me that I had triggered an unresolved mind file in the filing cabinets of her mind. But before she could verbally protest, which probably in her mind would have been a gesture to stand up for me, I started explaining that it was my choice to relax those boundaries in the first place. There's always a reason why we choose to behave a certain way. The motivation behind that choice, because remember, your mind's process works so fast that unless you train yourself to become more mindful and learn which mind files are being referenced, you're literally going through life on autopilot. And the autopilot that you're trusting was created when you were too young to understand what the hell was even going on in your world. But because I understand this process, I explained to this person, I chose to dig into my fear cabinet and locate the mind files that prompted me to be overly lenient with this person. Because I knew if I didn't do that, if I didn't figure it out, it would happen again. You see, people don't take advantage of you. Well, not once you're an adult anyway. I mean, they certainly do when you're a child for a lot of reasons, but mostly because you're naive. You literally aren't capable of understanding consequences or forecasting them. You haven't lived long enough and you haven't gathered enough information about the world and about other people and about yourself to make good choices. But once you're an adult, and when I say adult, I don't necessarily mean, hey, you turn 18 and now you've magically gathered all the information you need to make good decisions. Hell no. Doesn't usually really happen until you're, I don't know, in your mid 30s at least. I think Carl Jung, I'm pretty sure, said something around age 40 being that magic number where you're just like maturing. But everybody's different. I mean, some people mature earlier than others. And of course, there's folks who never mature at all. But there's no magic number for being an adult. Anyways, when you get to being an adult, You give people permission to take advantage of you in multiple ways. Now, one of the ways you do that is by relaxing your boundaries. Now, lots of people don't even have boundaries to relax. They don't even know what's important to them because they've never taken a hard look at the files in the filing cabinets of their mind. Maybe there never was a need to because they were lucky enough to never hit that brick wall that all of us who grew up in high levels of dysfunction did. Or maybe they just chose not to. Who knows? Everybody has their reasons, right? Now, there's some folks who set up boundaries that are motivated by and in anger and defiance. So, for example, let's say you hang out with your girlfriends every weekend and you do fun things like you go out to dinner and then you go to a movie and then maybe out for drinks to a dance club or whatever. And there's this one friend in your group who insists on being the person who chooses the restaurant, the movie, and the dance club. This person considers herself to be the leader of your group. For months on end, maybe even years, everybody in your group lets her be the person to choose. Everybody goes along with it because nobody wants to risk confrontation. Or they tell themselves that, well, it doesn't matter because you wanted to see that movie anyways. In other words, everybody chooses to concede to this self appointed leader's wishes. But then one day, for who knows what the reason is, you're like, I want to choose today. And so you bring up the movie that you want to see. And your friends are all like, yeah, let's go to that one. But that self appointed leader, well, they didn't like that you made a choice. And they had a different movie in mind. So now everybody in your group is at a crossroads, right? Everybody has to choose to either go along to get along with this self appointed leader or figure out a way to convince her to agree with all of you. I mean, most people, what do? They choose to give in and go and see the movie she chose. And because this is the most common response, let's say you all decide it's not worth the effort to fight because, you know, what are all the things we tell ourselves? Well, life's too short, right? But now you all go to the movie and it was horrible. And now none of you feel like going out for drinks or dancing. Your Friday or Saturday night, whatever night this is ruined. So whose fault is it? Well, certainly not your fault, right? Because she was the one who insisted that you all go to that movie. Fault, right? That word just gets people going, doesn't it? If somebody treats you badly when you're an adult, their bad behavior is on them, absolutely. But if you allowed it to happen without stopping it in its tracks, and stopping it in its tracks is an uncomfortable thing to do. Arguing with the self appointed leader of your group isn't fun. Then it's ultimately a consequence of a choice that you made. You chose, for whatever that reason is, to go along to get along, right? So whether you choose to avoid conflict or whether you weren't ready to risk the relationship, because people who are self appointed leaders tend to be the kind of person who would threaten you with unfriending you if you don't go along to get along. They gaslight you. They'll turn things around to make it seem like it's your fault. And there's that word again, fault. So here's the thing. If you're allowing people, and it doesn't have to be a close friend or a relative even, maybe it's your supervisor or your boss, or maybe it's some person in an institution or an organization. Whoever that person is, if they're insisting that you do something that you don't want to do, whether through manipulation or coercion, well, that's a tough situation to be in, right? I mean, if you talk back to your supervisor or your boss, you risk confrontation that could result in losing your job. If the potential conflict with an organization, say your union or an institution like a university, if you feel they're pressuring you to do something you don't want to do, well, now you're faced with a difficult choice because you have to choose to risk whatever it is that thing or person has kind of holding over you or not, like, or you choose to stand up for yourself. See, confrontations, regardless of who they're with, your spouse, your partner, your sister, your brother, your best friend, your supervisor, your boss, your union rep, whoever, confrontation isn't easy. There's always risk. And it's up to you to decide if the risk is worth the potential reward. So, actually, the real decision is, do you value you more than them? So, how do you decide? How do you learn to make choices that put you in a place of value rather than sacrifice? Well, you have to figure out which mind files are being referenced in those moments and then reassess them. Likely in these situations, you're probably going to have to work backward, probably through several mind files to get to the root file, the one that started the whole path to personal sacrifice and giving in all the time. And when you locate that, you're going to find narratives that say, well, I didn't do anything wrong, which was written when you got into trouble for doing or saying something. And probably eventually you'll find one that says, Mommy and Daddy said I was bad. And because of that, then there's one in there somewhere that says, I must be a bad person. See, those are statements wrapped in shame and guilt. Now remember, shame and guilt are at the very bottom of that vibrational scale of emotions, on that list of emotions. And before you can get to self-respect, and what I mean by that is, as an adult, when you realize that you are claiming a victim badge because people taking advantage of you or gaslighting you, they don't respect you. All of those things are related to it's not my fault, that mind file. That mind file that says it's not my fault. You have to, as an adult, from an informed adult perspective, review and reassess those initial mind files and work through the apathy and then get to grief and work through that. And then keep moving up the scale to fear and then longing. Eventually, you're going to reach anger and pride. And then, after you've worked through those, you're going to find courage. And then, once you find that courage, you'll also discover you have a willingness to learn how to do things differently, which takes you eventually to a place of acceptance. And then the next time that you're in a similar situation, you'll move to an energetic place of reason and engage all of your critical thinking skills. You'll start to make better choices, and before you know it, you've moved all the way up the emotional vibratory scale to love, where you start putting yourself first. You can't just jump from shame all the way up to love. It doesn't work that way. So let's go back to that person I was having this discussion about, reassessing my fault. And I explained that it wasn't so much about what that person did or said in the relationship, right? It was about when I got to the point where I realized, okay, this was my fault. I did relax those. Why did I choose to sacrifice the self respect that I had worked hard to earn prior to meeting this person, right? I let all of that hard work go. I was willing to sacrifice it. So I needed to understand which mind file that I missed or didn't fully resolve. Because sometimes we think we've resolved one and then life brings you something and shows you, no, you didn't. Resolving past abuse and trauma, the healing journey itself, right, is learning who you are. It's accepting responsibility for your thoughts, your beliefs, and actions. And that, I'm telling you, is not as common as you might think. People are far more apt to assign blame than to accept responsibility for themselves. But you can choose to get out of that victim game. You can. You can choose to move from survival mode to self trust. You just have to keep working through those files in the filing cabinets of your mind. Resolve the ones in your fear cabinet. And then once that is done, start filling up your love cabinet with stories about your successes and narratives that talk about acknowledging your true worth. That's it for today, folks. See you next time. And remember, caring is sharing. So hit that like button so that other people who might benefit from this program are able to find it. See you next time.